Welcome. My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm a Microsoft Principal Technical Trainer. I'm excited to be your guide for this learning path number 11, Troubleshooting Solutions by Using Application Insights as part of the AZ-204 course. Monitoring your application performance is a unique feature of an App Insights account. Now, Azure provides monitoring across the entire Azure platform, as well as any other cloud or on-premises environment. Azure Monitor provides insight to metrics and logs across your infrastructure, whether they be on-premises, Azure, or other clouds. And Azure Monitor has done that for years. We're adding to that the capability to actually get telemetry information from your application. So no longer do you just have to get, my CPU is at 90%. Well, what's causing that? Yes, you could go into the metrics and see where the specific threads were, but I want to be able to see what is my page load time is. I want to see what the most used attributes are, what kind of browsers people are coming from. So all of that app performance information is what we're going to be focusing on here to get specific information, not just about the overall performance of metrics and logs that you get generally in Azure, but specifically around the specific application that you're working with. This is going to get us into the only module for this learning path, which is monitoring the app performance using Application Insights. We're going to show you how to get into Application Insights and some of the configuration features, as well as some recent modifications to App Insights, where in the past, we're going to still show you some of the legacy ways of adding code to your code and a thing called an instrumentation key. We've now extended the capability to now actually use agents to be able to do some of this monitoring without actually having to put it in your code. We'll show you all of that as we go through, and we have a lab that you'll actually be able to see all of this in action. Getting telemetry about the actual performance of your application, its availability, the features that are being used, is going to be critical to the overall availability and performance of your application, as well as its future development and improvements that may be made. Azure Monitor is great for that overall perspective, as I said, but to be able to get into the specifics of your application is where we're going to make the distinction. When you take a look at the app's Insight account, we get those live metrics, you get the availability. We're going to talk about how to create an availability test. We've got GitHub integration with it. We got our usage, we've got smart diagnostics. So all of these features are just a few of the capabilities that you're going to get with an App Insights account. We've got capabilities to take a look at the telemetry, as I said, page views, load performance times. We can take a look at browsers, where those browsers are coming from. We get host diagnostics, we get user and session counts that you're dealing with, AJAX calls from web pages. All of this is just some of the information and telemetry that's going to be made available to you. When you want to take a look at when to start this monitoring, I would say as early as possible. You want to be able to have benchmarks, because ongoing monitoring is great, but if you don't have a benchmark from a performance perspective to measure against, how do you know if you're either overachieving or underachieving the expectations? So what you might want to do is right from runtime, is it benchmarked to what you're looking for? Is that the benchmark you're going to set for ongoing monitoring you're working with? At development time, how is the application loading and performing to potentially, make its way through into production to meet those expectations from a production-ready application? So we're going to take a look at all these capabilities to be able to now define where and when to create this monitoring. When you take a look at information generally from monitoring, we've always defined what are called logs and metrics. Metrics are numerical values that are point in time. And as I said, these are things that have been collected by Azure Monitor for many, many years. They refer to things like temperature and CPU utilization and memory utilizations at a specific moment in time. And by themselves, they may not show you very much, because 85 degrees is a great temperature if you're on a beach to have another beverage. If it's the core temperature of your body, you're in hypothermic shock and you're about to die. So numbers by themselves rarely told us the whole story. And so those combination of metrics and log information, which are point in time collections of volume of information, were available to Azure in its monitoring tools. We could always export that information for the longer period of time than the default 90 days that Microsoft keeps that information for you. You could create that into a log analytics workspace and store that information, and then use Kusto query language or other tools to analyze that information to get a better perspective of what your application and environments are performing like. Log analytics is an extension of that environment. We are still going to store log information in an Application Insights account that you're creating, which at the foundation of it is basically an extension of log analytics. You're still storing log information in this location to be able to provide analysis against that information. Application Insights, from its inception, allowed you to add specific code and a thing called an instrumentation key to collect the information from the applications that it was added to. And it was always our recommendation that if you had multiple applications that you wanted to map communications across, you would add that code to all the bits of application, adding the common instrumentation key to them, so it collected that log information into a common location. And I'm going to show you a chart that will actually show you load times between applications within a thing called an application map. Now, this has changed over time. While it's been the standard since the inception of Application Insights, we now have an auto instrumentation capability where you no longer have to add that code and an instrumentation key, because the industry has also come along from the instrumentation key and uses the open telemetry APIs, as well as we now have an agent-based system that you have the capability to just enable at places like your web app and your function apps and other components. I have a slide that'll show this to you, but you can just enable that as an agent-based system and then give it the connection string that you're going to use to the App Insights account. Here are some examples, and I'll do this for you in just a second in the graphical interface, where you can actually now just go into the resource, thing like an Azure App Service, whether it be a VM, either on premises as well, that you can now go into and enable the agent to collect this information directly and just provide it the connection string. Looking at the chart is just showing you some of the comparisons of the traditional App Insights instrumentation key and some of the language that is used versus the open telemetry information that is now going to be made available through the agent and its connection string. Let's go into the graphical interface and take a look at some of these differences. So here I am in a deployed Application Insights account that I've created, and you're seeing some of these values that I was just talking about. The instrumentation key, which ties it back to this account. In every application that I deploy some code to, which I'll show you in a second, by providing this key, keys that information back to this account to store that log information in a common place for us to be able to query against. Now, this is what we're moving to that I was just talking about as a connection string to be able to connect to that information. So two things here. I'm going to show you the App Insights demo HTML page that I'll show you in just a second. And what it's doing is showing you the added code that you would have to be able to go in and add, and where you would add that instrumentation key to send that information back to the App Insights account. It's also on here where you would set up and configure all of those different telemetry informations that you want it to collect to send back to the App Insights account. And this is just a sample of a demo page. That presents this information. So you're just seeing that there's the code, and you can then track the events, but it will collect that information and put it back into the App Insights account. Other features that you have available on the App Insights accounts, I've mentioned this across other resources that we've identified through here. I can create network isolation where I don't have to now access the App Insights account through a URL or publicly available connection. I can actually use it through a private endpoint that I can now deploy to the network segments that I'm dealing with. I mentioned that you don't have to install that software and the instrumentation key into your application to collect that telemetry information anymore. We mentioned that there's a variety of services available for you to be able to automatically do this. And so I've come into a web app here as part of my demonstration. I'm going to come under monitoring. This is where I have my traditional metrics and alerts and logs that I have available to me. I have an Application Insights feature here, which I can now enable this capability to have the agent gather that information together for me using that open standard. One of the things that you can configure on the Application Insights is an availability test. you're seeing that there's 3 different types that you're working with. In fact, there was 4, but one was recently deprecated. And you'll see that the last one, the URL ping test, has been deprecated in September of 2026. Now, for the vast majority of what the URL ping test did, a standard test is going to be able to replace that capability and provide some standard testing to be checking the availability of the endpoint itself. You also have the ability to create custom tracking availability based around a specific sequence of activities that you might want your application to perform to check its availability. And you have the ability to create up to 100 availability tests on any of your Application Insights resources. This is a feature that is going to allow you to, by having that common either instrumentation key or your connection string being tied to a single Application Insights account, you're going to be able to get a feature called an application map. And what it's going to do is show you the connectivity between the individual applications within an overall microservice component. You're going to see the drill through capabilities into a specific application to get the deeper telemetry information that was collected. You're going to be able to see where there's communication slowdowns and drill through that information. It's great to be able to see the overall performance of the application, opening up other pages where the potential issues might be. But if you make the mistake by creating different connection strings or Application Insights accounts and using them across different portions of your application, you won't get this total view that you're seeing here. You will get only the portions that share that common repository, whether it be an instrumentation key or a connection string to store that information. So this is going to get us into an exercise where we're going to go in and create these resources and see how they perform.
We're going to do an exercise. We're going to build some infrastructure pieces to do monitoring. We're then going to deploy an application. We're going to play around with the application. We're going to create some failures, and then we'll go into the Application Insights and see the numerical values that it collected. The first little bit is just infrastructure setup, where I'm going to create a web app and then deploy an application to it that we're going to be using. This is all stuff that we've done in other recordings. I'm going to create a web app. Add it into the resource group that's already created. Give my web app a name. Select code and a runtime of .NET. Use Windows. I'm going to change the region to West US 2. I don't have an app service plan there, so I'm going to create one. And then I have to pick the plan for the resources. I'm going to turn on Application Insights and create a new one. In my region, create a workspace. And then create this. This takes a few minutes. I'll speed up the process. Now that the resources have been created, I'm going to go there and do some configuration on them. Scrolling down to the monitoring section and get into Application Insights. Scroll down, select .NET Core, the recommended method, and deploy. Go back up into the overview. You'll see everything's been deployed, and I've got my URL to access the application. I'm going to go into PowerShell, and I'm going to build my application. If you haven't been in PowerShell before, there's some pre-configuration that it would have asked you to do to pick a subscription and possibly select a storage account. I've already done that, so I've skipped that step. I need to create a directory structure. I need to run the command to create a new Blazor app in the folder. I'm going to run my .NET build. Now what I need to do is to publish my app. What I'm going to do now is just zip it up and get it ready to deploy. Application now has been deployed into the app space. I'm going to go to the application. Now the application is started. You'll see that it's got several tabs. I can get into a counter. I'm just going to create some activity here and go into the weather, come back into the counter. It just resets, but I just want to do a couple of things in here, jumping back and forth, reload the page. Again, just to create a bunch of activity, response rates. I'm going to force a failure, going back to the home page, come up to a directory that doesn't exist. It's caused a failure. Refresh this a couple of times. Going back into the app. Perfect. And close down the PowerShell, come back into my App Insights, and we'll take a look at what information it collected. I come in to investigate. This should populate with some information, failure requests, server response times. I'm going to come down into my failures. And you can see there's quite a bit of information in here that I can take a look at. I can actually drill down and get into the specifics of each of the failures and gets quite a bit of detailed information. So with that, as a demonstration of creating an application, running the application, having an App Insights account that's going to collect that information that we can get that telemetry. Let's return back to the recording.
Welcome back. We want to close out this module with our knowledge check. And question number 1, what availability test is recommended for authentication tests? Go ahead and pause the screen if you want to. That would be a custom tracking availability test that you would create for that authentication test. Question number 2, what metric collection type provides near real-time querying and alerting on dimensions of metrics and more responsive dashboards? Go ahead and pause the recording. Depending on the version of your SDKs, they will do a pre-aggregation based on time of the values published to the Application Insights account. That will give you that near real-time time sequence set of activities that you could then use in your dashboards. So that brings us to the end of Module 1, as well as to the entire learning path. What we've shown you in this learning path is that Application Insights, in conjunction with your traditional monitoring features of Azure Monitor, we have the capability of taking a look at log information about the performance of your application at a very deep level. This is not just the standard metrics and log information of the overall performance of your infrastructure. This is looking at the detailed information of the application, page load times, the number of times the specific feature was selected on a page. All of that deeper information allows you to not only check for the performance and availability of your application, but gives you benchmarks to measure against, as well as plan for future development of your application and their deployments. Thank you for joining me in this recording. I look forward to seeing you in another recording.